Welcome to Ask a Property Manager, episode number 109. Today we're going to be talking about capital expenditures, spending those big dollars. When does it make sense to improve your rental property? And stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to show you the tenant retention hack that has saved us thousands upon thousands of dollars over the years. Stay tuned. There's a ton of money that gets thrown around in real estate, but not all of it gets used in such a way that it helps increase the value of a property. In fact, not all money in real estate should be focused on increasing the value of a property. We'll get to that in just a minute, but overwhelmingly, when a property investor is looking to invest money in a property, it needs to do one of three things. It needs to meet one of three separate criteria. Essentially, you're looking to maintain the existing quality of a property, draw in new tenants, or retain your existing tenants and increase the rents. We're going to jump through all of these points over the course of this video, but I wanted to start with that first point on maintaining the quality of your property. That first point can be overlooked so frequently by housing providers, and typically it's to their detriment. The reason I say that is because failing to adequately maintain the interior and exterior condition of your property will absolutely lead to a reduction in the amount that you're going to be able to charge for rent. It's also going to lead to a reduction in the number of tenants that you're going to be able to attract to that property. And it's also going to limit the amount of rent that you can charge. So you're going to have three issues. Can't get new tenants in, losing existing tenants, and not going to be able to increase rents on new tenants that are coming through the door. So really every other point that we're going to talk about today is just a function of that first point, maintaining your property to a certain level of quality. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every property needs to be maintained to, 4-point Sheraton level, 5-star hotel, whatever the status may be. You don't need to go that far, but you do need to stay current with what's appropriate in your market. So essentially what that means is that you need to constantly look at and evaluate the market and make sure that your property meets whatever the standard is in your market. Having units that fall below that standard, below whatever the standard is in your market, is going to lead to a significantly less profitable property for you, as well as the inability to attract tenants and retain those tenants like we had talked about. And really what you're trying to do here is attract the best quality tenant that you possibly can to your property. So realistically speaking, you're going to want to make sure that you're taking care of maintaining the property. Our second point is on drawing in new tenants. So vacancy is obviously the main killer when it comes to any sort of a property investment. The main goal here is always going to be to reduce vacancy as much as possible and as fast as possible. So when you're talking about drawing in new tenants, you're typically going to be thinking about the space that that tenant is going to be living in. The primary thing that you're focused on is the interior of their apartment. So what are the things that are going to be most appealing to tenants when they're looking at the actual physical apartment itself? And sometimes the better question to actually ask is, what are the turnoffs about this apartment and what can we do to correct them? Sometimes you just have an apartment that it's the ugly apartment. It needs some love in order to kind of fix it up a little bit and make it attractive to tenants. Sometimes you have those and you just need to put a little bit more into them. When we're talking about the inside of the unit, we're not talking about amenities and things like that that would be offered by apartment complexes. I'm not talking about pools. I'm not talking about tennis courts and things like that. I'm talking about the interior of the apartment, things inside the apartment. What are tenants looking for? Generally speaking, a tenant is going to be looking for the apartment to be clean. They want it to be well lit. They want it to be in good repair, and they want it to be a safe place for themselves, their friends, and their family to be able to live in and visit. So you have to make sure that all of your units meet that criteria at a minimum. I don't think that that's really a shock to anybody. I'm pretty sure everybody understands that. If you're in a unit and it generally has an old or a beat up feeling, that unit is not going to be as easy to rent as a unit that's already been updated and it's all shiny and new. Not saying you need to go through and spend tens of thousands of dollars worth of cash, but even a fresh coat of paint and some new flooring can go a long way in an otherwise older unit. Those are not huge expenditures in the grand scheme of things, and it can really, especially paint, can make a unit go from bad to good so fast. It just improves the quality and the look of a unit so fast by throwing a fresh coat of paint on the walls. An inexpensive stainless steel appliance package can go a long way in dressing up a unit. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can get a basic 18 cubic foot stainless steel front refrigerator. You can get a basic stove that is black and stainless, and it doesn't have to be a ton of money. but a stainless almost always looks better than your typical white basic appliances that you would see in some of these apartments. Doesn't mean that you have to go and spend 10 grand on the refrigerator with the tablet in the door. I'm just saying it should be a nice presentable appliance package. And so honestly, sometimes the deferred maintenance gets to a point where you do need to make a large scale investment into a unit or into a property in a full scale renovation or a rehab. Really, it boils down to understanding the building and understanding your market and not over improving based on what the market is telling you. You want to be able to bring in the top quality tenant in your market without being over improved so that you're not essentially leaving money on the table by not being able to get higher rents because you're capped by the market. You want tenants that are going to be high quality, that are willing to pay market rents for your units. Now let's talk a little bit about keeping your existing tenant base. Keeping your existing tenant base is just as important as bringing in new tenants. It's actually more important than bringing in new tenants because new tenants come with a vacancy period at the beginning of that tenancy when you're turning the unit over. Keeping an existing tenant in place means there's no vacancy time, means that cash flow continues on a monthly basis. So keeping an existing tenant is as important, if not more important, than bringing in new tenants. Bringing in new tenants brings money through the front door, but that isn't worth anything if your existing tenants are leaving out the back door just as quick as you can bring new tenants in. All you're doing is creating a constant state of churn at your property, and it's going to wind up being more expensive in the long run as you're constantly doing those turnovers. So what sorts of things can you do for existing tenants to keep them at your property as opposed to losing them to another property while still being able to bump those rents up a little bit to keep them at market rate? Many landlords will not raise rent on good tenants because they think that by not raising rents that they are doing themselves and the tenants a favor, and that tenant's not going to leave because they're not going to want to go and find another apartment. It's going to be more expensive, blah, blah, blah. I completely disagree with that stance. And the reason I say that is because I feel that rent needs to be increased on a yearly basis because the expenses go up on a yearly basis. We've talked about it before on this program, so I won't beat a dead horse here. But realistically speaking, we all know that the expenses for everyone has gone up substantially over the course of the last couple years. Not increasing your rents is leaving you in a position where your property is actually worth less money because you're not bringing in as much rent income and your expenses are higher. So you really do need to make sure that you're keeping up with market rents as much as possible across your portfolio. As far as how much you should increase the rent, I think that's going to be specific to your market. And I don't think it makes a ton of sense to dive into it here. But one thing I will mention is that tenants will often get annoyed when there's an increase in rent, particularly when there haven't been any sort of major increases in service offerings or any major repairs done in their unit. So if you're going to bump those rents up on an existing tenant, sometimes it makes sense to find a project that would make sense for the tenant. It improves the tenant's quality of life. It's still a representation of an investment into the property for you, a capital improvement, if you will. So it's going to increase the value of the property and make that existing tenant's life a little bit easier. A good example of this would be swapping out dim lights in the kitchen for something bright, like brand new LED bulbs or something like that. Swapping out a light fixture for something that's nice and bright so that you can see what you're doing when you're cooking in the kitchen. Going from incandescent bulbs to LED in the kitchen makes a huge difference, and it's not a huge expense. It's one of those things that's definitely going to improve the quality of life for a tenant. Another good example would be having worn out carpet replaced, where a tenant has lived for several years. I understand that it's an annoyance to do flooring in an occupied unit, especially because you're going to have to sit and move stuff around and everything else. It's going to be inconvenient, but it's definitely going to improve the quality of life for that tenant in their unit, and it's going to improve the value of your building if you ever decide that you want to start looking at the building for a possible resale or something like that. That's the recommendation I have with stuff like that. Find little projects that will increase the value of the building while still increasing the value of the tenant's quality of life. That tenant's going to be thankful, and they're going to continue to stay in that unit. They're going to be happy to stay in that unit, even if the rent's a little bit higher, because you show that you care and you show that you're maintaining the building. That's really what it boils down to, and that's what's going to do. It's going to bump your bottom line up bit by bit, year by year, as you make those little improvements. Raising the rent is a balancing act. If you raise rent too quickly, you could start to see your existing tenant base start exiting out the back door. We just talked about that. That's one of those things that you want to try to avoid because vacancy is obviously the killer when it comes to a rental property. So finding a way to raise rents without being overly aggressive or without losing tenants is kind of the key there. That's what you really need to strive for. Now, I promised to share with you my best tenant retention hack at the end of this video. We're at the end of the video, and here we are with my favorite little hack here. This is something that anybody can do, and it definitely leads to an increase in overall tenant satisfaction and retention across all of our properties. I've got the data to back this up. I can prove it. It's factual. It's super simple, and any landlord can do it. It doesn't matter what your portfolio size is. Keep your properties well maintained. When a tenant calls with a maintenance issue, respond to it as quickly as you can. I'm not saying that you have to run out there at 2 o'clock in the morning for the drippy faucet, but getting a vendor out there within a day or two to take care of that maintenance issue is going to lead to a lot more satisfaction from your tenants. When a tenant has to wait weeks for a work order, even a simple work order, to get squared away, it definitely has a negative impact on the landlord-tenant relationship. So that is my strong recommendation, my best tenant retention tip for you. Keep your properties well maintained and jump on those work orders when they come in, because that will help you to keep your tenants happier, and it will help you to retain that tenant for a longer period of time. Your tenants and your bottom line are going to thank you on this. Thank you all so much for watching. If you learned something today, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. If you have a friend or a family member that needs to see this, do us a favor and share it with them. Questions or comments, drop them below. We'll talk to you soon.